So Armor 3.0 launched with Edge of Fate, and I know a lot of people are very overwhelmed with this system. And so I wanted to sit down and make like a series of videos going over build crafting and answering a lot of questions that people have. One of the biggest questions that I've been getting constantly in videos, in live streams on Twitter are, how the heck do I know what stats to go for? And then when I know what stats I want, how do I know which archetypes of armor to then go and farm to achieve those stats? And that is an awesome question. It's something that I personally, as a data nerd, have been having a lot of fun with these last couple of weeks. And so this video, I'm just gonna go over my method. And it's not gonna be for everyone. That's totally fine. But I'm gonna go over why I settled on the stats I wanted for every build, how I then translated that into armor pieces that I should farm, and then once I got those armor pieces, the flexibility that kind of afforded me. Now, I am going to be assuming tier 5 armor for all of this. I know not everyone has consistent access to tier 5. Solstice is raining tier 5 armor if you're 400 light, so I really recommend trying to get there if you're close and just farming as much as you can before this event ends, but you'll have other opportunities. Tier 5 stuff will be much more common once Ash and Iron launches in a month, and then I'm sure things like the Epic Raid or Festival of the Lost or Future Iron Banners perhaps will also rain tier 5 armor as well. So you will have plenty of time to get your hands on this armor, and then it's just kind of good forever, which is nice. Yeah, even with the new gear tag or whatever, it'll be fine. Once you have a god roll set, you'll be perfectly fine, I promise. So I'm going to go over a couple of builds, and really I want to focus on one main build for this video, and maybe I'll tag on like an example or two at the end as well. But for this, I want to talk about my general solar warlock build. Now, the reason I picked this is because it is very unique in terms of there are a lot of exotics you can pair with this. You know, sometimes I'll be running Speaker's Sight, like in a raid, in like a contest mode raid, it'll be Cenotaph. In some encounters like Hobgoblin, I'll want to have Lunafactions. Sometimes I might want to use Starfire Protocol or Sanguine swaps for like a final stand. Or Sunbracers if I'm doing something that's really, really heavy on ads. But all of these exotics can use the same core solar build. My stats, at least on my like general running build, won't really have to change that much. And so my approach when I was making this build was, hey, let's make a 5 legendary piece set. And then, you know, make that like my base stats. And then if I want to add an exotic into that build, farm an exotic that will slot in and replace the legendary piece that's already there. But that way, instead of, oh man, I have to farm 4 perfect pieces of legendary armor for my Speaker's Sight, and then I have to farm 4 more for my Starfire Protocol. This way, you are only farming 1 exotic to swap in, and that'll be much more approachable and achievable in the long run, I think, at least in my opinion. So that was my goal. I wanted an all-around solar build of 5 legendary pieces of armor. And then the next step was to talk about stats. So what stats do I want on this? The nice thing about tier 5 armor is it is very deterministic. It can be kind of complex to think about up front, but the nice thing is it always drops with the same amount of stats. And if you get lucky and you get the tertiary that you want, then it's like you know exactly where you're allocating it. And so that means if you have like a friend that has a build that you also like to use and they already have a perfect set of armor, you can literally just copy their armor and farm for that. It's so easy when you're looking for tier 5s compared to the old system where everything could drop with anything and stat ranges were all over the place. Now it's like, all right, I'm on tier 5s and I know that I need some combination of these 5 archetypes and tertiary stats. It makes it a lot more approachable once you get a grasp on the entire situation. So what I mean by that is tier 5 armor will always have a primary stat with 30 points in it, a secondary stat with 25, and those are set on your archetypes, and then a tertiary stat with 20 points in it, and that can be one of the other 4 stats that are not part of your archetype randomly when it drops. When you masterwork it, the 3 stats that are not primary, secondary, tertiary will each get +5, giving you +15 stats total, and then the mod that you put on is +10. So every tier 5 piece of armor has 100 total stats. You have 5 legendaries, like we mentioned. So you are playing with 500 total stats here. And the only other thing that kind of messes with that is fonts, which we might get into, and then the fragments that you're using on your class. So I know I have generally 500 points to play with. And then if we take a look at my setup here, and this is, you know, your builds might be different. This is just the build I like to use. You can see that I'm using fragments that give me plus 10 class, minus 10 health, and then minus 10 grenade. So if I go here, so I just have to keep that in mind as I'm building, that I will actually effectively have 500 plus 10 minus 20, so 490 total stats, not 500. That's just something to keep in mind a little bit. But as I'm going through, the next question I ask myself is, what stats do I actually care about? So in my general running build, what I typically want is as much weapon stat as possible. That way I'm doing more damage to minor and major enemies. And if I start to creep in past the 100 mark, then I also will get more ammo as well, because every point past 100 gives you more chance to get double ammo from bricks that you find on the ground. The other stat I very much treasure in my general like running builds, like in between phases or like mechanic phases, or just doing like farming grandmaster content, that sort of thing. The other thing I'm really going to care about is my super stat. Up to 100 increases regen. Above 100 is either damage if I'm on like Song of Flame, or if I'm on Well, it's duration. So that's kind of in my head. Okay, I really want to get as high on those as possible. So I start to think, let's shoot for 120. Now, this is a calculator that I made for myself. Unfortunately, I built this in Excel. I'm not really sure if there's an easy way to make this public for everyone. So I will kind of work on that, but you can also just write a lot of this down. Like a lot of my notes that when I was first building these, this is just on printer paper, 8x11 printer paper, where I was writing down exactly what stats I wanted, my fragments, what that means that I have to shoot for, that sort of thing. So I highly recommend that you just break out a pen and a paper and start to think about it. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be using this class or this calculator here, and just ignore. I have this set up so I can like do specific pieces of armor. Just ignore that. It doesn't matter. So for this build, I kind of want something with, I like to start with like 120 stats in stat points in the stats I like. So my weapons and my super, like I said, I value the most. So I'm going to put 120 of each of those. Then in either PvE or PvP, there's a stat that I consider as dead as you can get. So in PvP, I do not care about the weapon stat. I know there are people that care about the weapon stat for certain cheesy things like Outbreak, 2 bursts, and that sort of thing. I personally think health is much more valuable. And so I will take any chance I get to get rid of all of my weapon stat in PvP specifically and put that into health. Now that's super interesting because in PvE, health is a complete dead stat. I would have negative health if I could. I do not care about that stat at all. It might be different for you, but in my approach, I want as little health as possible. And I can get a minimum of 25 on armor, because if you're masterworking all 5 pieces and it's never your focus, then you can have a minimum of 25 health that you can then further subtract using stat tuning mods, which we will talk about later, or fragments, which I do have a minus 10 health fragment. We will talk about that here in a little bit as well. So right now you can see just with those 3 input, I am at a total of 265 stats. Once again, I recommend breaking out pen and paper for this, but you can have 500 total. Let me count that up here. So 500 minus 265 is 235 stats left. I have 3 stats and they're my ability stats, so you generally want them all to be as high as possible. So I'm just going to take 235 divided by 3, and you have about 85 stats. So I'm just going to put them all at 75 here. And that gives you 490. I have 10 extra stats to spend, and I know I'm gaining 10 grenade from my fragments, and I know I'm losing 10 grenade from my fragments. So I'll go ahead and focus an extra 10 points in grenade right there, and I'll just take the extra 10 points in class. So just as I'm approaching this is sort of the general build that I'm shooting for. 120 weapons, 25 health, 75 class, 75 melee, 85 grenade, 120 super. So this is the hard part. This is the hypothetical stat totals I want to hit. How do I translate this over to actual archetypes? There's 6 archetypes. Each of those archetypes can have 4 tertiaries. That's like a billion combinations. Now, unfortunately, this is where you're going to have to do a little bit more legwork. It is a lot of work, but this is a really, really, really great website that I like to use. d2edgestats.com. I'll have this link down below. Now, unfortunately, there is no website that I'm aware of currently where you can input your stats and it'll spit out what archetypes that you need to get. I would love for that to be a thing. If someone is developing that, please, if you need any help, let me know. Just advertising the site or whatever, because I think that is a huge tool that the community would love. But I'm going to go ahead and what you can do here is you essentially can set your archetype, your tertiary, your tuning mod, your other stat mods, that sort of thing, and it will spit out what your totals are. And so I like to do just a little bit of messing around with numbers on this site. Now, as I mentioned, I am using 3 fragments here. One that gives me -10 grenade, one that gives me -10 health, bam, and one that gives me +10 class. So I don't really care what this specific, like I think I use torches, not benevolence, but it doesn't really matter because they both give you the -10. Just to make sure I have that locked in. And now I know that I want to target those numbers that I said before. I want 120 weapons and 120 super. Now, this is where you just get to have a little bit of fun. Because of those are my 2 big mods or stat distributions, I know I probably want to focus those archetypes. So for instance, if I want 120 weapons, I probably want the gunner archetype. So I'll set gunner, which comes with a secondary grenade. And I'm just going to throw some numbers out here. This is going to be a little bit of trial and error. But as you get better at this whole process, you'll learn like where to start. Like your starting points will be a little bit better. So you can see just by doing 3 gunners and 2 paragons, I haven't even chosen the tertiary perks yet. That gets me pretty close to some of my higher limits that I want. So I'm at 90 out of 120 weapons. I'm at 60 out of 120 super. So what that means is I'm probably going to want to juice up my super stat a little bit with some tertiaries. So if I put a tertiary on each of my gunners, that gives me for 3 pieces of armor, that'll give me 3 weapons, 25 grenade, and 20 super stat times 3. Another thing I'm going to mention here is I am putting these arbitrarily on different pieces of armor. It literally does not matter at all. It does not matter at all. At the end of this, we're going to walk out with 5 pieces of armor that need to be a specific archetype with a specific tertiary. That can go in any slot. So as I was farming armor, I had a checklist here that says, okay, for my solar, or let's say for my PvP build, I need all of these archetypes with all of these tertiaries. I need a bulwark with the super, a bulwark with a grenade, 2 brawler pieces with super, and a grenadier with health tertiary. And as I was getting them, I was marking down which slot they were dropping in. And eventually you'll get 5 different armor pieces that have the combination of those stats that you want, or those archetypes and tertiaries that you want, and you can go from there. This also works like I mentioned, if you have a friend that has a build that you really like, just look at the archetypes and the tertiaries and just farm for those on any piece of armor, and then it'll work out eventually. So that's why I think like Armor 3.0 is super complex and it's super deep, but once you have an understanding of it, it's actually really easy at an end game level to go and like just make your own builds, because you can really just take them from anyone that you see using, which is kind of cool. So we went ahead and we put the 3 super tertiaries on these gunner classes here. So that leaves us once again with 90 weapons out of 120, and that leaves us with 120 super. So our super is done. We also have 50 points worth of mods that we can apply here. So you can keep that in mind. We have to decide what we are using our last tertiaries on. So we have 2 20-point distributions to put somewhere. Our class is pretty low here. It's at 25. melee and grenade are close to where we want them. We want them both at 75, but our class we had up at 75. So if I add all 40 stats to that, you end up getting pretty close here. My tertiaries are down here, so I'll add class to both of them. And you can see we're at 100 out of 120 weapons. We're at 65 out of 75 class. We are at 65 out of 75 melee. And that right there is 1, 2, 3, 4 mods. So if I just go ahead and do, okay, I'm going to do plus 10 super, plus 10, plus 10. So I did essentially 2 mods that were weapons, bring me up to 120. I'll do a plus 10 for class. I'll do a plus 10 for melee. And then remember, I have a fragment that gives me minus 10 grenade. So I can actually, this is actually technically at 85 is what I'm trying to say here. But you can see I have 1 extra mod slot and I've already hit the distribution I want, right? I'm at 120 weapons. I'm at as low health as possible, 75 class, 75 grenade, 120 super, 75 melee. And so I have 1 more mod I can put anywhere. Generally, I'm doing grenade-based builds with speaker sight, sun bracers, starfire. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that mod on grenade just to bump that up a little bit so my regen's a little better, but you have a lot of flexibility here. And so what this tells me, this exercise, and I know this is a long video and I'm so sorry, but what this tells me is, okay, I am looking for 3 gunner pieces with a super tertiary, a paragon piece of armor with a class tertiary, and 2 of those. And if I get those combinations right there, then I have the perfect solar build to start modifying. And that can be on literally any armor pieces here. So I got that. I got a gunner with a super tertiary on my helmets. The paragon with the class tertiaries I got on my gauntlets and my chest, and then my other 2 gauntlets with super tertiaries I got on my boots and my bond. Then you can just start playing around. The other thing is if they're tier 5, they'll have this stat modifier. So I can use this modifier to drop my health even more. So I happen to get a grenade tuner on this one, so plus 5 grenade there for minus health. I happen to get a weapons tuner here, so minus 5 health for plus 5 weapons. This was minus 5 for super, minus 5 for health, minus 5 for weapons, minus 5 for weapons. So I actually am technically negative 10 health, but you can't go minus 0. So that's kind of fun. And my stats are absolutely juiced. And then, like I said, okay, well, if I want this to be a speaker sight build, then all I have to do is go find a gunner speaker sight with a super tertiary. Oh, I found that. And without breaking a sweat, it fits into my build, and my stats are still relatively the same, which is pretty sick. Oh, that's not even the right thing. Oh, okay, I want to make Starfire work today. Bam, I can slot that in. I can get one that is relatively the same with a high amount of super and class, but like I said, I have a little bit more melee here, so that grenade, so that brings my weapons, my super, and my grenade super high. It just slots right in, and you can do that with any exotic that fits into this general build. That's my process here. I know it's a lot. I know it's going to be a lot of trial and error for a lot of people, and it's going to be a learning curve, and it's not something that a lot of people might necessarily enjoy right off the rip, but it does teach you a lot about the game, and once you get the hang of it, it's really not as complex as it seems. It's just a lot of number crunching. If you have any questions, let me know down below. Love your faces. I'll see you very soon. Have a great day.